who wasn't here last time, I'll give you the handout after class. So we were supposed to match the letters, right? These are runic letters, right? So they are engraved on stone and on wood, and this is how it should come out, right? So you'll see that these are symbols that we no longer use, right? Because I don't have the pointer. These are symbols that we no longer use because these are old English, right? And then they faded out of use around the 9th century, right? And we adopt, as a result of Christianity, the spread of Christianity to the British Isles, we adopt the Roman alphabet or the Latin alphabet, right? And you see that for each verse, this is a poem from Old English. For each verse, you have the rune, right? The runic alphabet here, and this is supposed to be how they pronounce it, right, in Old English. And then the third line is supposed to be the translated version into modern English. So in the first one, we have Summon, the second line, Summon hine halete and grete ont, right? So translated out in modern English as some man otpon saram, right? So some man him saluted. Some man saluted him and greeted him, right? And then the second line, him be his noman nemde katmon sang me, right? So it would be and name him by his name, right? So Old English is an SOV. Old English is an SOV language, meaning that the verb comes last, just like Korean. So when you translate it, you have to go to the last verb, and then working out the object. So for example here, and name him by his name, like that. So verb last, right? Catmon is a name of a guy. Catmon, sing me something, right? So the third line, what the wugu. So whatever, this is whatever. So something, and then ta is then, right? An suarede, he on quath. So this is th, right? So that one is also a th, quath. So what should be the modern English translation? Then on suarede, what do you think? What word should it be? Answered, right? Answare, answer. Don't they look alike? Answer. He is he, right? And quad is said. They translated that for you already. And then next line. Ne. Kan ik nik singen. So ne is not, right? Not I, nothing. Not I can, not can I, nothing sing, like that. I cannot, in other words, I cannot sing anything. Not can I, nothing sing, which means I cannot sing anything, right? So he said, Catmon, sing me something. Catmon says, I cannot sing anything, right? And then F is again, he should be he. Quath, you already have one, which is said. So he said, Quatre. So whether, through. So this is thou. Me is me. Meek is can or might, right? Can or might. Singan is sing. Nevertheless, you can sing me, right? Nevertheless, you can sing to me, like that. So that's the end. And then ta is then, and we have said, said he, right? and then Cadmon said, and then he meaning Cadmon, right? Then said he, what shall ik singen? What do you think? What is what? Shall is shall, ik is I, singen is sing. What shall I sing? Like that. So you see here the runes or the runic alphabet, right, which faded out of use after the 7th century, just little by little, and then people used the Latin alphabet instead. So the Latin alphabet would look like the second line, right, the second line. And the second line is also the pronunciation of the runic alphabet. And the second line is what Anglo-Saxon people or Old English use, and then we have kind of adopted perhaps 90% of this version of the Latin alphabet up until the present day, right? And then the last line is your translation. Okay. So today we'll move on to where's this? So from this week onward, you can download our PowerPoint slides. We'll discuss in particular causes for language change and also common mechanisms of language change, including sound change, morphosyntactic syntactic change, and also semantic change. Okay. So first, the definition of language change. So language change refers to permanent alteration, meaning that when language changes, it changes like permanently, right? Sometimes it goes back to the previous stage, especially in terms of word usage. But typically speaking, it's permanent alteration of some aspect that occurs in a particular language, right? And we would say that all changes involve either gain or loss of something. It could be a sound, it could be a word, or it could be a grammatical structure, or it could be meaning, right? So all changes involve either gain or loss. So you either gain something, you either gain a feature, you either gain a new word like that, or you might lose it, right? Or both, meaning that you have a case of substitution. So substitution is when you perhaps switch the order of something, right? So in Old English, which you already saw in the exercise before, the word what that we have, what, was whet. So in this case, you switch the first two sounds, right? So you don't lose or you don't gain anything, but it's just both, right? And when we talk about language change, for many people, maybe most people, when they perceive language change, right, they think of language change as something bad, as they have negative reaction to language change, right? Think about your family members who are older than you, or your professors who are older than you. They always, when they talk about how we speak, they always say that the way we use language, people in this day and age, they always think that our language has gone downhill, right? Meaning that our language has become worse and worse, right? So, but in fact, language change is a fact, right? It's a historical fact and it's a universal fact also, that language changes all the time, right? And no one can stop it from changing, right? The causes of language change are maybe double layered, you can say. They are double layered because you have the top layer being the social or historical or political causes that will trigger the underlying causes. So there are two main layers, right? So we have the internal layer, which means that it's about the language itself, right? So the internal layer is the natural cause, whereas the external layer has to do with either cultural change, historical change, or political change that might trigger what lies beneath, which is the natural tendency for language to change. So there are two layers, okay? So two factors, internal and external. External being you might be in contact with another language, you might be in contact with another group of people who speak a different dialect, and you adopt the way they speak, you adopt the way they use language. But when you adopt the way they use language, there's also the tendency for the language to change in a particular way already, which lies beneath the external cause, right? So there are two causes. So we'll talk about the internal causes first. So the internal causes, again, internal causes have to do with natural processes of language changing, right? So internal causes, for example, ease of articulation. Ease of articulation is, or you can call it ease of effort, right? Ease of effort. So this has to do with human anatomical, physiological reason, and then the tendency to move that in that direction, right? So this is more like predisposition or predestination, right? Under this category, you have different processes, such as you guys know assimilation, right? Assimilation, as, and then simulate, similar, right? So when a sound becomes similar to another sound, right? Assimilation, for example, let's see. So if you have something like this, if you have, I want, let's see, you to warn Peter. If you say this fast in connected speech, in natural speech, so this warn, I want you to warn Peter, I want you to warn Peter, it should sound like an M, right? I want you to warn Peter, I want you to warn Peter, instead of warn. So this is called assimilation, right? Similar, simulate, similar. So a process by which one sound becomes like another sound due to the environment in which it occurs. The environment here is what? The environment here is the P, right? P is a bilabial sound, right? So the sound that you made with two lips, and then N is alveolar. So N cannot stay. So N assimilates to P, right? In the same category, which is a nasal sound. So you have an M instead, like that. So this is like a physiological or anatomical reason, right, for why things move that way, right? And then what else do you have? You have omission. Omission is the drop of one sound, right? So especially when you have so many sounds, right? When you have so many consonant sounds, you tend to drop one. Let's see. Fifth, let's say George the fifth throne, like this, right? So here, the king, George the fifth throne, like that. So how many sounds do we have here? Fifth, F, right? TH is one, S is one, and then TH one, right? So people tend to drop one of these, right? So they might drop this, and then they just go with the next sound. Just the fifth throne, like that, okay? So especially when you have so many sounds back to back like this, so you tend to drop the middle sound, okay? Ease of effort, right? Ease of articulation. And then you have clipping. Clipping is a process by which you cut one part of the word, right? Professional becomes pro, like that, so clip. Reduction to schwa, we already talked about that, right? That in unstressed vowel, in unstressed syllables, you reduce it to the schwa sound because schwa is a mid sound, right? So internal causes still, right? So causes that are natural, right? Depending on our anatomical or physiological makeup, right? The second process is called phonological symmetry, right? So you tend to fill the gaps in the system, right, for structural balance. For example, in Old English, you don't have this sound, right? The j sound. And you don't have n with a tail. You don't have n with a tail. So these are at least two gaps, right, in the system, right? So why they are gaps? Because in Old English, you have m, n, right? So this is bilabial. This is bilabial. This is alveolar. And then there's velar, as in B. This is B and P. This is, let's see, D and T, and this is G and K, right? Voice and voiceless. Now, there's this gap, right, in the system where it can be filled, right? Where it can be filled. So, in context where you have things like this one, you already saw this verb in Old English, right? Singan, right? Singan. So, at first it was pronounced like singan, like this. Sin, and then with a G, and then gan, right? To sing. Now, N and G, they can be combined, right? So that N and G becomes N with a tail. And you don't have to pronounce the G anymore. So that's why these days, words like fishing, we don't sound the G, right? We don't say fishing like that. We say fishing like that. So now we have a new phoneme, which is, I'll use this, with this N with a tail here. So you fill that gap in the system because it can be filled because there's a velar gap here, right? Same thing with this symbol j, right? So at first we have the voiceless version of it, right, which is sh. So the voice version is a gap that can be filled. So we borrow from French that sound, right? Sound that you find in words like garage, like that, rouge, like that. So gap in the system. And finally, here we have analogy. Analogy has to do with the fact that you reduce irregular forms, right? You eliminate irregular forms by generalizing by comparing it to another form, right? So plural S and past tense T and D, two new words. So when we have new nouns in English, right? When we have new nouns and new verbs in English, we don't change the vowels inside, right? We don't do things like ox, oxen, child, children. We don't add the en like that. But what we do is to add s to everything, right? To add s to everything. So computer mouse like this, we normally call it computer mouses instead of mice, right? Because this is a new form, right? That comes with the computer technology like that. ED also, you just add T or D depending on what sound comes before, right? Rather than change the inside vowel like eat, ate, eaten. We don't do it that way anymore. So this is what we call analogy. So by comparing the S and then the past tense T or D with the majority of words in English like that. So that's what we call analogy. On the next page, we have hypercorrection. Hypercorrection has to do with the fact that speakers overcorrect and apply a rule in context where it should not, right? where they should not do that. So, for example, between you and I, it should be between you and me, right? But people think that the me form is wrong, right? So they hypercorrect themselves and use between you and I, when in fact the me form is the correct one, right? And also, who and whom distinction is what many American people may be confused. They think that whom is the correct form and it sounds more formal, so they tend to overgeneralize the use of whom in places where it doesn't belong. Like, whom took the last piece should be who took the last piece, right? Because who is the subject, right? Who is the subject form. But whom with an M, whom is the object form. But here, you need the subject form, right? Took is the verb here. Right? But people tend to overgeneralize, thinking that whom is more formal, like that. Spelling pronunciation. When we see words written down, right, we think that those words have that pronunciation as the way that they are spelled, right? The same pronunciation that they are spelled, in the same way that they are spelled. Often, the word often here, the T is usually omitted, right? Because again, there are two sounds that you see here, T, off, up, F and T, right? And for ease of articulation, people usually drop the T, right, often. But some people, because they see the T written down, so they pronounce it often, right? So often has become one of the standard ways to say this word. Or forehead. Forehead. So you don't usually pronounce the H because the H is a light sound, right? Words like hotel, words like hour, like that tend to, those words with an H in the front tend to lose the H, right? The H tends to be dropped. But here, people see the way that it's written, so they pronounce forehead. But normally people would say forehead without the H. Or almond without the L, but they see L written down, so they think that it should be pronounced, so they say almond instead of almond, like that. Like salmon, almond talk, like that. The L is dropped, right? But some people think that because there is an L in the writing form, they pronounce the L. Reanalysis. This is going to be important in later chapters. Reanalysis has to do with when speakers reinterpret an existing structure in a different way, right? So when we coined the word hamburger, right? When we coined the word hamburger, it actually came from Hamburg plus Hamburg is one of the towns in Germany, right? Hamburg plus But we reanalyze it, right? By cutting the ham part and the burger part, rather than Hamburg plus the morpheme right? So we have hamburger, and by analogy, we have cheeseburger, fish burger, and all sorts of burger, right? Bulgogi burger, whatever. Because we reanalyze Hamburg thinking that, oh, it must be ham, right? There must be ham, but there's no ham, right, in hamburger. And then burg plus like that. Or in Old English, we have A. A is an article, right? Nadder is a kind of snake, right? Snake. And then the word A, nepron, the thing that you wear when you cook, right? Just to prevent food spill out, like that. So, but people reanalyze because when we say it, another, people don't know whether this is a or and, the article a or and. So they reanalyze. The original word was nadder, right? So they reanalyze thinking that an is part of the article a. So they think that it's an plus adder, and plus apron. So nowadays, what do we have? Adder as a noun and apron as a noun rather than nadder and napron, right? Another one that people reanalyze is this one. Let's see. Let me show you. Let me use it here. Let's see. You know the word due to, right? Due to. So the money that was due to Krista, like that. Or the homework that was due to Krista. Oops. You know the word due to, right? Now, we are talking about reanalysis, right? Speakers reinterpret the existing structure in a different way. So the word due to, when you use due to in modern English, what do you use it for? Due to plus cause, right? Cause. I was late due to an accident, like that, right? Due to. So you think of due to as one unit, right? So one unit, which means like because of, like that. I was late due to an accident. I was late because of an accident, like that, right? So you think of it as one unit, right? Nowadays. But actually, it was from this kind of thing. The money that was due to Krista, due as one word, meaning the money that someone owes to Krista, like that. Owing, and then to here is a preposition, right? The money that was due, just like the homework that was due to Krista. To is like a preposition telling you the direction, right? But then people reanalyze it as one chunk, right? So due to as a chunk rather than was due and then to Krista, right? So this is called reanalysis. Right? So the existing structure was the money that was due, like on Monday, the money that was due to Krista, the homework that was due on Monday, like that. That's the original structure. But now we think of due to as one unit, right? Due to meaning because of, like that. Okay. The next one is renewal. All linguistic items are used in different contexts with new meaning. Think of words like awfully, hugely, massively, terribly, right? We use them as intensifiers to mean very. So they have been downtoned, right? So the strength of these terms, awful, something that causes awe, right? Huge, big, massive, big, terrible, bad, right? But we usually use this term to mean very, intensifiers, right? Or he's visually challenged. We use the word challenge, right? Plus the adverb visually instead of just calling that person blind, like that, right? So this is called euphemism, right? To make the language more polite, euphemism. He is mathematically challenged. Is it good or bad? So he is bad, right? At mathematics, like that. Mathematically challenged. Horizontally challenged, what do you think? Horizontally. So this direction, right? Horizontally challenged, maybe he's chubby, fat. Horizontally, right? Vertically challenged, vertical, this way. So it has to be negative, right? So if vertically negative, if it's negative, then he's not tall. Then he's short, right? So instead of saying, oh, he's fat or he's short, we say vertically challenged, horizontally challenged, like that. Right? So as a way to euphemize, avoid saying something that might cause offense to people, right? Now on to external causes. So the things that we have talked about so far are internal causes, right? The tendencies for language to change in those directions, right? So as you can see in this case, we have what we call doublets, right? Double words that refer to the more or less the same thing. But one is a native English form and the other is a borrowed term that we adopt because of contact with those languages. For example, pig is an English term, right? We call the animal pig. But we use the term pork to refer to meat, the meat of that animal. Pork is not English. Pork is French, right? Norman French. Sheep is English, basic native English term, but mutton is French also, right? Were it not for contact, if it was not because of the contact between English and French, we would say pig meat or sheep meat, like that, right? And there are other terms also that are like this. For example, calf, like little cow. The meat of calf meat, we call that veal, right? Or chicken meat or chicken, we call poultry, right? Or deer is also a native English term. The meat of that is venison. So these are contact-induced changes, right, in our vocabulary system. Strangely, for goat, we don't have the French term for it. We say goat meat, right? And let's see, snail. What do you call snail? Go to those cosmetic store and you'll see like snail mask and so on, right? But if you go to a restaurant, upscale restaurant, there's a menu, that entry on the menu that's called escargot, right? Escargot, which is a French word for snail, right? Or cow and beef also. Did we talk about that? Cow and beef. Cow is an English term. Beef is a French term, right? So chicken. Now, we talked about two major causes of language change, right? Internal and external, right? So language related and non-language related, right? So now we'll be looking at specific changes. So we'll talk about this in three categories: sound, words and syntax, and also semantic changes, right? So for sound change, we talked about this already, right? Assimilation is a process when a sound becomes similar to an adjacent, the neighboring sound in voicing, manner, or place. So when you have the prefix con plus all these roots, complete, conlate, conrect, so the N here will change depending on what comes after, right? And the N will change in terms of place of articulation to match the next one. So this is basic. Dissimilation is the opposite of assimilation, right? Dis is away from. So away from being similar, meaning that you make the sound different, right? So the word purple, from Latin purpur. So there are two R's here. So one R becomes L for ease of articulation also. The word theft here, right? In this case, there are two TH, right? TH here and here. So they changed the letter sound to just T. Or this one is also dissimilation. How do you pronounce the second word of the year? Second word of the year. February. So how do we spell it? February, right? So the careful pronunciation, February, like that, right? With two R's, right? Two R. But the way that many people pronounce it is February, like that. One R is gone, right? One R is gone. Because when you pronounce two R's together, perhaps almost back to back in a row, it's hard to do. So February, right? So people drop one R and just say February like that. Because there are two R's here. So that's an example of dissimulation. Addition of sound. So you insert a sound, again, for one of the reasons that we come across normally in many languages, right, for ease of articulation. So when you insert a sound in sequences of perhaps usually nasals, liquids, and fricatives. So this is a tendency for many languages to do so, right? So D is inserted between N and R, N and L, and R and L, like these ones. Thunder, so D is insert just to break off, right? Because when you insert a stop, you have to stop the air from coming out, right? So it's a resting place for the tongue, right? Spinel, spindle, elder, alder, like that. B inserted between M and R, slumbere to slumber, to sleep, like that. So you can see that because D and N here, D, N, and R, they are in the same place of articulation. So D is a good stop to insert. B also has the same place of articulation as M. So B is a good place to rest your tongue, like that, or lips, like that. When you have an addition of sound, you can lose a sound also, right? Again, for ease of articulation, for all these words that can be pronounced in careful, all these syllables which can be pronounced in careful pronunciation, evening, history, memory, right? Opossum, like that. About, Barbara, dumb, without the B, sing, G is gone to 0, like that. So this is common in many languages, right? Perhaps you don't know metathesis, right? Metathesis is when you reorder two sounds, right? So we borrow from Spanish tronada, but perhaps that's hard to pronounce because you have a sequence of two sounds, right? T and R, right? Which we call a consonant cluster. So we break it off and switch R and O, so we have tornado instead. Or this word in English. In modern day, in modern English, a lot of people would pronounce ask, sk, S and K, ask, as this, X, right? If you ask me, like that. And they are looked at like, you are being lazy, like that, right? Because it should be the way it is spelled, ask. But they don't know that in Old English, it's axion, which is the verb to ask. So actually, it's the modern day people who pronounce correctly that are wrong, right? Because it used to be axion, K and S, but then for some reason, in modern English, people switch it to ask, right? But because of our natural tendency, right, to do what is easier for us to pronounce, we go back without, maybe unconsciously, without our consciousness, to ask, to the old days, right? The old way of doing it, right? So this is called metathesis, switching of two sounds, right? And the last one, I think, is palatalization, the process whereby a consonant comes to be articulated, plus a B, be articulated in the palatal region due to an adjacent palatal sound. So whatever consonant it is that is near the palatal area will be pronounced as a palatal sound. So usually S and T, right? S and T, when it's followed by a Y, Y is a palatal sound, or J is a palatal sound, right? So you change that sound. Miss you, to Misha, like that. Got you to gotcha, like that. Because the following sound is a palatal sound. Rotatism, a consonant, usually S, becomes R in related word. So rotatic or rhotic means that you curl your tongue, right? You curl your tongue. So rotatism is when a consonant becomes an R sound. R, when you pronounce an R sound, you curl your tongue, right? Genus to generic, like that. S becomes R. Lenition is also something that you'll see when we discuss Old English. A process whereby a consonant is weakened so that it almost becomes a vowel, right? So the weakening of a consonant so that it becomes more like a vowel. So stops, which are strong sounds, right, can become fricatives, and fricatives can become liquids, and so on. So mother becomes mother, T, fricative sound, the D plus the cross, halchian to hallow, and so on. In modern English, there's one example to show you how do you pronounce words like writing, writing, in or water or writing, water, in natural pronunciation or natural speech or writing. So from the verb to write, right? So this is just write like that, right? With a T. But when you do writing, when you change it to the ing form, this T is not a stop anymore, right? It becomes more like an R, right? So people use this kind of hook-like to represent the sound there. Write to become writing, right there. So this is also a case of lenition, right? So it's not water, right? At least in American English, in many dialects of American English, it's not water. So T is not that strong. T is not a stop anymore, the strong stop anymore. So it becomes like an R, water, water, like that. So this is an example of lenition, where a sound is kind of weakened so that a stop is no longer a stop, but maybe become a liquid or an affricate or a fricative, like that. And there are also other cases of sound change, like devoicing, when a sound loses its voicing quality, unrounding, when a sound becomes unrounded, breaking, and diphthongization. We'll see examples later. I want to get to the semantics today, so let's look at this before we do exercises. We just talked about sound changes, right? Now, the next category has to do with morphosyntactic change, right? Morphosyntactic changes. Now, morphosyntactic changes have to do with the way we put endings and inflection on things, or the way we arrange word order, right? So analogy that we looked at before, right, that we talked about in passing before, is one of the morphosyntactic changes. So analogy has to do with comparing, right? Comparing two different or three different forms, and you eliminate the irregular ones, right? So there are more processes of analogy, such as back formation. Back formation has to do with when a speaker develops a new word that didn't exist before from another word that existed. For example, we have the noun babysitter, right? And people think that the ER is a morpheme, is a part of the word that has to do with person who babysits, like that. So they make the word babysit out of the word babysitter, right? Which didn't exist before. Right? Peevish also. Peevish is an adjective meaning something that's kind of annoying, or something that you don't like, something that's a pain in the ass for you, like that. And then it's just an adjective, right? But people think that ish is an adjective suffix, so there should be a noun. There should be the original noun for it, and people develop the word peeve out of it. Or window shopping, right? People develop a verb out of it, window shop, mass product, mass produce, like that. Okay? So this is called back formation. The words on the right didn't exist before. Sometimes this might involve false analysis. Like the word peas. When we borrow these words, peas and cherries from French in Middle English, they already have an S in the singular form. They already have an S in the singular form. Like peas and cherries. You see peas and cherries from French. They already have an S. But when we borrow them, people misanalyze these words, thinking that, oh, they are plural. So let's drop the S and make a singular form out of it. So we have pea and cherry with a Y. It's true with alms and richness also. When we borrow them, they already have the S. So we think that they are plural. So we just have the plural form like that. And this one is perhaps the most interesting of all. It has to do with the way lay people, folk etymology. The way folk has to do with, lay people. The way people perceive an unfamiliar word and associate that as a more familiar word. Right? So the way people perceive an unfamiliar word and then associate that with a more familiar word. For example, the word female. You guys think that, oh, it has to do with male, and then you have a prefix "fe," right? You guys think that? Female, because you see the word male, right? It has to do with male. And then when it becomes a woman, you add the prefix "fe," right? Whatever that means, whatever the prefix "fe" means, right? But actually it's not. It's from femme and elle in French. Femme is feminine, like that. Elle is like a diminutive suffix, something that makes it smaller, right? Like piglet, so diminutive suffix. So it has nothing to do with the word male, which means a male, like that. But it's from femme plus elle. Elle is a suffix that means little, like that. So, but people misanalyze this, thinking that it has to do with male, but no. Or the word wedlock. If you see this word, right? If you see this word, you might think, oh, it has to do with lock because there is the morpheme lock inside there, right? But actually, it comes from the word lock, which means offering. It has nothing to do with the door lock, like that. Or shamefaced, you might think that it has to do with face here, right? But no, it's from fast, which means fixed, right? Shame that is fixed. Or hangnail. Hangnail, you guys know hangnail? Like loose skin like this around your nail. Hangnail, right? But you might think, oh, it's the nail that is hanging like that because there's the word hang and there's the word nail. But no, actually it's from ang, which means pain, right? Which originally means painful nail because your skin like is abrasive like that. Or helpmate. You might think, oh, it has to do with help and then mate, like classmate, clubmate, whatever, right? But no, it's from help plus meet. Meet is like suitable for help, like that. So people think of these morphemes, think of these parts of the word as something that is more familiar, right? So what we'll do is we'll leave the semantic changes because that's a big topic for discussion. We'll leave that for next time. And we'll also talk about the Indo-European. But what we'll do today is to do practice exercises in your book. So if you take out your course pack and turn it to page 74, we'll do 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. So the first one, you're supposed to give let's see, the description of the following symbols, but I know that you already know how to give description, like the Z sound becomes the sh sound like that, right? So we can skip that because you can read, right? Oo becomes ow like that. So that's what they mean by description. Then name the sound change. So what do you call this kind of sound change? In the first one, what do you call that? Z sound is not palatal, right? Z sound is not palatal. So becomes j, which is a palatal sound. So what do you call? Palatalization. So you put in palatalization. Palatalization. Like that. What you might not be able to do is this one. Y here is a rounded version of this one. So when you pronounce Y, just like you pronounce E but round. So E, that's spreading of the lips, right? That's unrounded. E is unrounded. So you just round it, right? E, 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 like that. E. So it's E that is rounded. Number D. The process is unrounding, right? Unrounding. And for number 2, let's see. So for number two here, you have to think of natural pronunciation, and describe the change that occurs, right? So we talked about the word February, right? So think about the natural pronunciation of that word, and the word yolk, like this, and the way it's spelled. How do you pronounce the word yolk? Do you pronounce the L or not? You say yolk like that? No. So there's a process where a sound is dropped, right? So you put in that, the name of the process, and so on. So you should be able to do number 2. And number 3, kind of the same thing as number 2. So they compare 2 stages of English. ME is Middle English, Modern English. So clasp become clasp, like that. So what kind of process took place between Middle English and Modern English? You should be able to tell by comparing the 2 forms. Okay. So I'll walk around and help you. So on the midterm, if this kind of thing is given, then you should be able to do fine. Okay. 1 sound goes to 2 sounds. What do you call that? Breaking into 2, right? So we call this breaking, and or you can call it diphthongization. So 1 sound, ooh, and then it will break into 2, right? And then it becomes a diphthong, meaning diphthong, diff means die, right? Which means 2. We didn't discuss this in detail, but you'll see it when we talk about changes, sound changes in Old English next week. Number C. Who would like to do number C? This one is easy. B goes to P. What change happened? D voicing, right? D is away. So D voicing. Why? B is voice, P is voiceless, so we have D voicing, right? D voicing usually occurs in the last when a sound occurs in the last position, right? And number D dog, rounded goes to unrounded, so we have unrounding. And number E, vowel reduction. Number 2, February, dissimulation because there are 2 R's, right? Dissimulation because there are 2 R's here, right? So the drop of 1 R is because of the R that is coming afterwards, right? So that's dissimulation. You want to make them dissimilar. You want to make them not alike, right? Yoke, this one is easy. So who like to take this one? Yoke. So L is gone. So L becomes 0 like that, right? So we call it deletion, omission, loss of sound, right? So deletion or omission or loss of sound, same thing. Number C is easy, right? In, which means not. And then responsible, in is N, here N becomes R because of the next R, right? So it's assimilation. Simulate is similar, right? Assimilation. The pronunciation of every as every. Loss of sound, right? So schwa becomes 0, so it's omission or loss of sound. The word bright, how do you say it? Bright, right? Bright. Do you say G and H? Bright, like that? No. So GH is gone. So same thing, right? Omission or loss of sound. It used to be pronounced in Old English. In Old English, it was like bricht, like that, before the diphthongization. Number 3, claps and clasp. This is easy, right? 2 sounds got switched, so we call it metathesis, right? And swaru, to answer. And swaru, to answer. What is different between the Old English version and the modern English version? D is gone, right? D is gone, and W is also gone in pronunciation, right? In modern English, do you say answer? We don't. We say just answer. In modern English, it's answer, like that, right? So the W is gone from pronunciation, and also the D. So the D and W is gone from pronunciation. So again, it's omission or loss of sound, right? So loss of the 2 sounds, D and W. Kindred, and kindred. So relatives, right? Your relatives. So kindred and kindred. What has been added? A D, right? So we call it insertion or addition, same thing. Of D. Why is that? Because the N is an alveolar sound, right? So you can insert an alveolar sound, which is a D, right? Kindred and kindred. So it's easier to pronounce because you have a break and a resting place for the tongue in the alveolar ridge area. Launde to lawn. Launde to lawn. So what is gone here? D and also E, right? E at the end, which is a schwa sound in Old English. So DE is gone to 0. So we have loss of sound also. Number E, halid, which is lid, to just lid. So this one is easy, right? So H is 0, so loss of sound. Sometimes it's not only the loss of sound, but also the spelling, right? In this case, H is lost in terms of pronunciation and also in terms of spelling, right? But things like hotel, hour, like that. Some people, for hotel, some people don't pronounce the H, but the spelling is still there. And also for hour, people don't pronounce the H, but the spelling is there. But H tends to get dropped, right, in many positions. So for homework, and we'll come back on Wednesday, can you do 80 and 81? So we'll do 80 and 81. 80 and 81. And we'll come back and talk about this on Wednesday, 80 and 81.